popular kid's secret kiss had a secret of its own. Juan! The woods were darker than I remembered. Every tree looked the same. Every shadow felt alive. Juan! I shouted again, my voice echoing, swallowed by the endless night. My chest tightened as the silence stretched. Where was he? I called once more, louder this time. Juan! Where are you? A sudden crunch of leaves behind me made my heart jump. I froze. My breath hitched and my fingers clenched into fists. Slowly, I turned. It was him. Juan. Relief crashed over me so fast I almost forgot to breathe. Juan, thank God, I said, rushing toward him. His golden eyes glowed in the moonlight, and I couldn't stop myself. Before I knew what I was doing, I leaned in, my lips meeting his. It felt right, like everything had fallen back into place. For the first time in weeks, I was happy. But then, it happened. Juan pulled back, and his face started to change. No, not change, distort. His cheekbones stretched unnaturally, his jaw elongating, twisting. My stomach dropped as his skin rippled, sprouting thick black fur. No, 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 I whispered, stumbling backward as his body contorted into something monstrous. Golden eyes locked onto mine, but this wasn't Juan anymore. It was a wolf, massive and terrifying. It took a step toward me, teeth bared. Juan? My voice cracked. I kept retreating, my feet slipping over the uneven forest floor. No, please, Juan, stop! The wolf growled a deep, guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. It crouched, muscles coiling. No! I screamed as it lunged. My back hit the ground, and I threw my hands up, bracing for impact. And then, I woke up, gasping, drenched in sweat. I sat up in bed, clutching my chest like I could force my heart to stop racing. My room was dark, but not the suffocating kind of dark like the woods. Just normal, familiar shadows. It was just a dream. Again. I rubbed my face, trying to steady my breathing. 3 months. It had been 3 months since that night at the bonfire. Since I saw whatever I saw. Since I saw Juan change. And he was gone. No texts, no calls, no sign of him at school. It was like he disappeared off the face of the earth. I flopped back onto the pillow, staring at the ceiling. The nightmares were always the same. The woods, the kiss, the shift, the wolf attacking me. Every time, I woke up just before it could rip me apart. I didn't understand any of it. Not the dreams, not what happened that night, not why Juan left. And there was no one to ask. Who could I even tell? Hey, I think my tutor/crush is a werewolf, and now he's missing. Yeah, right. But the worst part wasn't even the nightmares. It was waking up. Because every morning I remembered that he was gone. And I didn't know if I'd ever see him again. About 2 weeks later, the woods had become my escape. After everything that happened with Juan, I couldn't stop coming back here. It was stupid, I knew, but part of me kept hoping. I don't know, maybe I'll see him. Maybe he'd step out from the trees and everything would go back to normal. Or as normal as things could be after seeing your crush turn into a wolf. That night, the woods were quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that made your skin prickle, like something was wrong. I followed the path deeper in, kicking at fallen leaves, my thoughts all over the place. That's when I heard it. A low, pained whimper. I froze, my heart pounding. The sound came again, raw and desperate. It wasn't human, but it wasn't just some random animal either. I knew, deep down, what it was. I ran toward the noise, crashing through the underbrush until I saw it. A wolf. Its leg caught in one of those cruel, old-fashioned traps. Its body trembled, fur matted with dirt and blood. But it wasn't just any wolf. It was Juan. Of course it was Juan. I'd know those golden eyes anywhere. Juan? I whispered, like an idiot. I mean, obviously he wasn't going to answer me in full sentences right now. But those glowing eyes flicked up to meet mine. And for a second, I saw the same mix of emotion I'd seen that night. Fear, pain, maybe even relief. I didn't think. I didn't stop to question myself. I just acted. Hang on, I said, my voice shaking. I've got you. I dropped to my knees, my hands fumbling with the trap. It was rusted and jagged, biting deep into his leg. He whimpered again, his body jerking as I tried to pry it open. I know it hurts, I murmured, my throat tight. Just hold still, okay? I'll get it off. It took everything I had, but eventually the trap cracked open, and Juan pulled his leg free, collapsing onto the ground. I sat back, my chest heaving, blood smeared on my hands. Juan, I whispered again, barely able to believe it. He shifted then, right in front of me, back into himself. His face was pale, his body trembling and all naked, but his eyes stayed locked on mine. Thank you, he said softly. And just like that, I knew I couldn't walk away this time. Half an hour later, I don't know how I managed to get Juan to my room without anyone noticing. It wasn't like sneaking a guy in was part of my usual routine, but somehow we made it. He limped behind me as I held the window open, his breathing uneven. I was too focused on getting him inside to think about the fact that he was practically naked. Once we were in, I motioned to the bed. Sit, don't argue. Juan gave me a weak smile, one of those tired, grateful ones that still somehow managed to make my stomach flip. He sank onto the edge of the bed, wincing as he adjusted his injured leg. Hang on, I said, already halfway to the bathroom. I grabbed the first aid kit and came back, crouching in front of him. My hands shook as I cleaned the wound. It wasn't as bad as I'd feared, but it still looked painful. Juan hissed when the antiseptic touched his skin. Sorry, I mumbled, avoiding his gaze. You're better at this than I thought, he said softly, and when I looked up, he was smiling at me. That smile. It was ridiculous how much power it had over me. My chest tightened, my pulse picked up, and suddenly I became way too aware of how close we were. And, the fact that Juan was wearing little more than torn up scraps. I stood up so fast I almost tripped. You probably need clothes. Juan blinked at me, clearly amused. Yeah, clothes would be good. I practically ran to my closet, digging through drawers until I found something. A t-shirt and sweatpants. Safe, non-threatening. I tossed them to him without looking directly at him, like my gaze might catch fire if I did. Here, I said quickly, you can, change. Thanks, he said, and then, just to make my life harder, he stood up and started changing right there. I spun around so fast I might have given myself whiplash. Could you at least warn a guy? Juan laughed softly. In a few minutes, the rustling behind me stopped, and I risked a glance over my shoulder. He was fully dressed, thank God. You can turn around now, he said, that same teasing smile on his face. I turned, trying to act like my face wasn't on fire. Okay, so, My brain scrambled for something normal to say, but there wasn't really a script for this. I mean, what was I supposed to do? Offer him a snack, ask him what it's like to turn into a giant wolf? But the longer I stood there, the more I realized I couldn't keep ignoring the giant elephant, or, well, wolf in the room. So I just said it. What are you, Juan? His eyes softened, and he let out a small laugh, shaking his head. I thought you'd have figured that out by now. Well, yeah, I said, rubbing the back of my neck. I mean, I've got the general idea, but I want to hear it from you. Juan sat back down on the bed, his expression serious now. All right, I'll tell you everything. He started talking, and I listened, hanging on every word. He told me about his family, how they'd been werewolves for generations, cursed by some ancient feud that tied them to the moon in the forest. He told me about the magic, the way it worked, and how it wasn't just about being a wolf. It was about connection, about fate. I couldn't believe it at first. Wasn't all this magic supposed to be just in books? But then he told me about us. When I first met you, Juan said, his voice quieter now, I didn't understand it, the pull, but then I realized it's part of the magic. We're bound, Scott. Destined. I blinked, my brain trying to catch up. Destined? Like soulmates? Something like that. We call it mate. You are my mate, Scott, he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. I didn't understand it at first, that's why I stayed away. I thought, maybe it would be safer for you if I kept my distance. But tonight, when you saved me, I couldn't keep pretending. It all clicked then. Everything. The way I felt around him, the way I couldn't stop thinking about him, even after what I'd seen. It was bigger than me. Bigger than anything I'd ever felt before. So, this whole time, I said slowly, we were just meant to be? Juan nodded. Yeah, I don't know how to explain what happened next, but it was like something inside me settled. Like I'd been fighting against the current, and now I was finally letting go. Okay, I said softly. I'm in. Juan's eyes widened. You're in? Yeah. I mean, it's not like I can pretend I don't feel it too. And you know, I care about you. A lot. His smile was so bright it felt like the room warmed up a few degrees. Juan leaned against me, his head resting lightly on my shoulder. The room was quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. It was just us, sitting there in the dim light, the weight of everything we talked about slowly settling into place. But then Juan shifted, lifting his head to look at me. His golden eyes glowed softly, and the way he looked at me, like I was the only thing that mattered in the world, made my chest tighten. Scott, he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. Yeah? I don't think I've said it yet, but thank you for saving me. For this. His gaze flicked around the room before landing back on me. For not running away. I let out a shaky laugh. I thought about it. His lips curved into a small smile. But you didn't. No, I admitted, my voice softer now. I couldn't. We were close. Too close. And my heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I could feel the warmth of his body, see every detail of his face. And then his hand came up, brushing against mine, tentative and light. Scott, he whispered again, and this time it wasn't a question. I didn't know who moved first. Maybe him, maybe me. But suddenly his lips were on mine, soft and warm and everything I didn't know I needed. My hands found their way to his face, holding him there like I was afraid he might disappear. The kiss was slow, unhurried like we had all the time in the world. And maybe we did. When we finally broke apart, his forehead rested against mine, both of us breathing hard. He smiled, his eyes half-lidded but still shining. I've wanted to do that again since that night on the bleachers, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Yeah? I said, a grin tugging at my lips. Same. He chuckled softly, and we shifted, lying on the bed. He curled into my side, his hand resting on my chest, his hand splayed out over my heart. Is this okay, he asked, his voice small, uncertain for the first time tonight. Yeah, I said, wrapping an arm around him. This is perfect. We didn't say much after that. He leaned a bit more against me and I wrapped an arm tighter around him, pulling him closer. It felt right, like everything had finally fallen into place. That night we stayed like that, tangled up in each other, the weight of everything lifting just a little. I wasn't sure what the future would look like, but for now, I knew one thing. I wasn't letting him go. A week later, Juan was back at school, and it felt like nothing had changed, even though everything had. He walked down the hallway like he belonged with that confident, quiet energy of his, the one that always made heads turn. But to me, he was just Juan, the guy who'd stolen my heart without even trying. We had to keep it low-key for a while, obviously. I mean, I wasn't ready to shout from the rooftops that my boyfriend was a werewolf. But that didn't mean we couldn't sneak little moments in. We passed each other in the hall, and I'd always feel that little flutter in my chest when our hands brushed, even if it was just a second. Juan would give me that knowing smile, the one that made everything feel like it was meant to be, and I'd smile back, trying to play it cool, though I was pretty sure my face was on fire. No one really said anything at first, just the usual casual teasing. I didn't care. I was used to it. But what mattered was that Juan was sitting next to me, our legs brushing under the table. I think they're starting to notice, Juan whispered, his lips close to my ear. I grinned, trying to keep my voice steady. Who cares? They can think whatever they want. He raised an eyebrow, smirking. You're brave, huh? I shrugged. For you, yeah. I guess I'm starting to not care what people think. That made him laugh softly, his hand resting on my knee under the table. I was seriously trying not to blush, but with Juan, it was impossible. Later after school, we walked together toward the parking lot, the air cool and crisp. I leaned in a little, nudging his shoulder. Hey, Juan. He looked down at me, that familiar, soft look in his eyes. Yeah? You're my guy, right? He smiled that smile that made my heart do that annoying little flip again. Yeah, Scott, I'm your guy. And just like that, walking side by side, I realized how much I didn't care what anyone thought anymore. Juan and I, this was real. and no one could take that away from us. 3 weeks later. It wasn't until that weekend when we were out in the woods alone that Juan finally showed me the full extent of what he could do. We'd walked deep into the trees, away from the prying eyes of anyone who might notice, and now we were just standing there, the forest stretching out around us. Juan's eyes were glowing slightly, that same golden hue I'd seen when he shifted. He looked at me, a little nervous but more excited. "You ready?" he asked, a playful glint in his eyes. "Ready for what?" I asked, though I had a feeling I knew what he meant. He grinned. "This." Before I could blink, he was gone. Like, gone. He'd moved so fast, it was like he vanished into thin air. I gasped and whipped my head around, trying to spot him. Then I heard him behind me. He was right there, standing a few feet away, grinning like it was no big deal. "Juan, how? What?" I stammered. He laughed softly. "Speed. That's one of the perks." I stood there in awe, my mouth hanging open. "That was insane." "Yeah, it's fun," he said, stepping closer to me. "I can move faster than any human could ever imagine." I just shook my head, still trying to process what I'd just seen. "I don't know how you even do that. It's like you're a blur." Juan chuckled, running a hand through his hair. "It's all about the connection with the earth. The wolf instinct." He crouched down slightly, then pushed off the ground, jumping up with ridiculous ease and landing effortlessly on a nearby tree branch, several feet up. I couldn't even form words. I just stood there, staring at him like he was some kind of superhero. He dropped down beside me, still grinning. "And strength," he added, flexing his muscles playfully. I took a step back, eyes wide. "You're kidding! You're really strong, huh?" "More than you think." He flashed me a wink, and then, before I could say anything else, he grabbed a thick log from the ground and tossed it into the air like it was nothing, catching it with one hand. I was speechless, totally caught off guard. That's crazy." Juan laughed, then took a step closer, looking at me with that same soft smile. "You're pretty amazed, huh?" I nodded, still trying to wrap my mind around everything. "I mean, yeah, how could I not be?" He grinned wider, his eyes glowing brighter in the fading light of the day. "Scott, I'm more than just a wolf. I'm yours too, if you'll have me." I didn't even think. "I already have you. You're my boyfriend." The words just slipped out before I could stop them. Juan's eyes softened, and he laughed, the sound low and warm. "Yeah, Scott, I'm your boyfriend." I smiled, feeling a rush of warmth flood through me. And before I could say anything else, Juan leaned in and kissed me. Soft, slow, like he was making sure this moment would last forever. And in that moment, with him by my side, I knew I had everything I ever wanted. 2 months later. The past 2 months with Juan had been perfect. Like, ridiculously so. I didn't think it was possible to be this happy with someone, but every day with him proved me wrong. Whether it was sneaking kisses in the hall, late night walks, or just chilling on my bed while he doodled in his sketchbook, life felt like it finally made sense. But today Juan seemed off. We were hanging out in my room like always, but he was quieter than usual, fidgeting with the hem of his hoodie. "You good?" I asked, nudging his leg with mine. He looked up, startled like I'd caught him doing something. "Huh? Yeah, I'm fine." I squinted at him. "You're such a bad liar. What's up?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's nothing, really." "Juan?" I raised an eyebrow. He groaned, leaning back against the wall. "Okay, fine. My parents. They want to meet you." I blinked. "Wait, what? You told your parents about me?" Juan chuckled, his golden eyes lighting up a little. "Yeah, Scott, finding our mate is kind of a big deal." Mate. That word still made my stomach flip, but in a good way. "So, do you think you'd be okay with meeting them?" he asked, his voice softer now like he was nervous about my answer. "Of course, I'd love to meet your parents," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. They're, wolves too?" Juan laughed, and just like that, the tension broke. "Yeah, they're wolves too." "What did you think, Scott? They're part of the pack." I laughed along with him. "I don't know. I guess I wasn't sure how this whole werewolf parent thing works." He reached over, squeezing my hand. "Don't worry, they'll love you." And just like that, it was decided. We'd meet his parents soon. What could go wrong, right? 2 days later, the day I met Juan's parents, I was a nervous wreck. I mean, I'd met parents before, girlfriends, buddies, but werewolf parents? That was new territory. Still, Juan's hand in mine, warm and steady, made it easier to breathe as we walked up to the front door of his family's cabin. Relax, Juan whispered, his golden eyes sparkling with amusement. They're going to love you. Easy for you to say, I muttered. They already love you. He laughed softly and squeezed my hand before pushing the door open. Inside, the cabin was cozy, with a big stone fireplace and the smell of something amazing cooking. Juan's mom was the first to appear. She looked so much like him. Tall, dark hair, sharp features, but her eyes were a softer, lighter gold. You must be Scotch, she said, smiling warmly as she walked up. Before I could even say anything, she pulled me into a hug. Yeah, hi, I managed, laughing nervously. She pulled back and gave me an approving once-over. You're cuter than I expected. Juan groaned, but he was smiling, clearly not embarrassed at all. Then his dad came in. He was a bit taller than Juan, broader too, with that same strong presence that made you think twice about messing with him. But his smile was kind. Scott, he said, offering a hand. It's nice to finally meet you. You too, sir, I said, shaking it, trying not to think about how his grip could probably crush mine if he wanted to. We sat down together, and as the conversation flowed, my nerves started to fade. His parents were warm, funny, and so clearly proud of Juan. They asked about school, sports, my plans for the future, normal parent stuff. At one point, Juan's mom put her hand on mine. We've never seen Juan this happy, she said softly, her eyes glistening. Thank you for that. I glanced at Juan, who looked a little embarrassed, but also so happy. I think he makes me happier, I said, smiling at him. By the time we left, I felt like I'd gained a second family. They welcomed me with open arms, and for once, I believed this whole mate thing was more than just magic. It was real. 15 minutes later, Juan and I walked away from his house, both of us in a great mood. Meeting his parents had gone better than I ever could have hoped. They were warm, kind, and clearly cared about Juan. And somehow, they seemed to like me too. That went pretty well, right? I asked, bumping my shoulder against his. Juan grinned, his hand brushing against mine as we walked. Better than well. I think my mom's already planning to adopt you. I laughed. Hey, as long as she keeps making food like that, I'm not complaining. We were so caught up in our bubble that I didn't notice the two guys coming toward us until they were right in front of us, blocking our path. Juan Ignacio, one of them sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. Long time no see. Juan immediately stiffened beside me. What do you want, Hector? He said, his tone low and sharp. The guy, Hector, I guess, smirked, looking me up and down like I was some kind of joke. So this is the mate, huh? Had to dig through the dirt to find him, didn't you? The other guy laughed, chiming in. Yeah, no wonder you haven't marked him yet. You're embarrassed, aren't you? I had no idea what they were talking about, but the words clearly hit a nerve with Juan. I could feel his anger radiating off him, his hands curling into fists. Shut your mouth, Juan growled, his voice low and dangerous. I stepped in quickly, putting a hand on his chest. Hey, let's go. They're not worth it. Hector chuckled, leaning closer. That's right, run along. Don't let your little human get hurt. Juan's eyes flashed gold, and for a second I thought he might lunge at them. But I squeezed his arm, pulling him gently. Come on, Juan, let's go. With one last glare, he let me guide him away. As we walked, I could still feel the tension in his body. But at least he was calming down. What the hell was that about? I asked softly. Juan shook his head. Not here. Later. I didn't push it. For now, I was just glad we were away from those jerks. Later that night, the whole thing with those guys was still bugging me. Juan had been quiet since we left, which wasn't like him. We were sitting on my bed and I finally decided to just ask. So, what did they mean back there? I said, keeping my voice casual. You know, about you not marking me. The second the words left my mouth, Juan froze. Like, literally froze. He didn't even blink. Juan, I prompted, leaning closer. He blinked then, shaking his head like he was brushing it off. It's nothing, he said too quickly. Just them being idiots. I frowned. It didn't seem like nothing. You looked really bothered. I said it's nothing! He snapped, cutting me off. I stared at him, surprised. He almost never got snappy with me. Juan, he stood up suddenly, running a hand through his hair. Just drop it, okay? It's not something we need to talk about right now. Why not? If it's bothering you, it's not! He said, a little louder than before. He sighed, not meeting my eyes. I need some air. And with that, he grabbed his jacket and left before I could say anything else. I sat there, confused and a little hurt. What was he hiding? Over a week later, it had been a week and Juan still wouldn't talk about the whole marking thing. I was tired of waiting, tired of being avoided. When I realized he'd started disappearing into the woods to dodge me, I decided enough was enough. I was going to get an answer. I followed him. When I finally caught up, he groaned like he knew this was coming. We started bickering. Why won't you just tell me what it means, Juan? Because it's complicated, Scott. Before I could argue more, we heard it. Footsteps. Several people walking towards us. Juan stiffened. I turned and saw them. 5 or 6 guys. 2 of them I recognized from the other day. They didn't look friendly. Juan stepped in front of me. What do you want? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. One of them smirked. Just here to make sure you follow the rules, Juan. Mark him or cast him away. No, Juan growled. Then maybe we will. In our own way, another sneered. Juan's growl turned into something feral, and for the first time, I was scared of him. Go, he told me, his voice hard. I'm not leaving you. Scott, go! I hesitated, but before I could move, 2 of them grabbed me. I saw Juan transform, his body shifting into a huge black wolf. The others changed too, and chaos erupted. I struggled against the guys holding me, kicking and swinging until I grabbed a wooden log. I managed to knock one down, but the other was too strong. Across the clearing, Juan was outnumbered, fighting off 3 wolves but getting hurt in the process. He defeated them and lunged to save me, but the last 2 wolves took him down. He was on the ground, bleeding, and they turned to me. I stepped between them and Juan, gripping the log tighter. I was ready to do whatever I could to protect him. Just as they lunged, a deep, bone-chilling growl echoed through the woods. Out of the shadows came a group of older people, Juan's parents among them. The wolves backed off instantly. Juan shifted back into human form, covered in cuts and bruises. His parents rushed to him as he struggled to sit up. His golden eyes found mine. Why did you come in between? He rasped. They could have killed you. I opened my mouth to answer, but the adrenaline was fading. Everything went blurry, and the last thing I saw before hitting the ground was Juan reaching for me. 2 days later, when I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the beeping of machines. The second was Juan, sitting in a chair by my bed, his head resting on his arms. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. I shifted, and his eyes snapped open. You're awake, he said, his voice soft but full of relief. How are you feeling? I gave him a small smile. How am I feeling? You're the one who got torn up, but... I blinked, taking a better look at him. You're all healed! Juan chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. Yeah, I heal fast. Perks of being a wolf, I guess. I looked at him in awe, but then I remembered the night. How long have I been out? What happened? Who were those people with your parents? I questioned. His smile faded, and he looked down, his expression serious. 2 days. You have been out for 2 days. I dropped a message from your phone to your parents that you will be staying with me for some project. And they are the elders of the pack. They saved us and punished those rogues too. He paused for a second as if fighting an internal battle. Scott, I'm sorry. I couldn't protect you. I should have been stronger, better, for you. I let you get hurt and I hate myself for it. I reached out and grabbed his hand. Juan, don't apologize. I'm not your burden. I'm your boyfriend. Someone who someday hopes to be your better half. We take care of each other, okay? We look out for each other. And for the record, you're more than strong enough for me. You're my everything. He stared at me, wide-eyed, like he couldn't believe what I just said. You mean it? Yeah. His lips twitched, trying to hold back a smile. The part about someday being my better half? I felt heat rise to my face. Yes, I mean, I know it's probably too early to be thinking about stuff like that, but yeah, I've never been so sure about anything in my life as I am about you, Juan. His hand brushed my cheek, his thumb tracing my lower lip. His eyes softened. Scott, I should have told you about marking before. It's how a wolf claims their mate. When they meet their mate, they leave a mark on them, marking them as theirs. It's a magical pact binding us together for eternity. I didn't tell you because I didn't know how sure you were about us. I didn't want to pressurize you. He hesitated, then added, but if you're sure, Scott, if you'll have me, I'd like to make you mine, now and forever. I didn't need to think about it. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. I'm yours, Juan, always. Later that night, Juan's parents were out for the night and I was staying over, which felt like a big deal already. My heart hadn't stopped racing since he'd told me earlier, I'll mark you tonight. I didn't know exactly what that meant, but the way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. Half nervous, half excited. I was sitting on his bed, trying to calm myself, when he walked in. The moment our eyes met, something shifted in the air. He looked at me like he was starving, and before I could say a word, he was on me. Juan grabbed me, his lips crashing against mine in a kiss so intense I forgot how to breathe. His hands were everywhere, on my face, in my hair, pulling me closer like he couldn't get enough. My head spun as he tumbled onto the bed, his weight pressing into me. I lost myself in him completely. Every kiss, every touch felt electric, like I was on fire in the best way possible. He whispered things in Spanish against my skin, his voice low and rough. And even though I didn't understand the words, I felt their meaning. Then he paused, his breath hot against my ear. May I? He asked softly, his tone a mix of desire and reverence. I nodded without thinking, my trust in him absolute. His teeth sank into my shoulder, and for a second the pain was sharp, blinding even. I gasped, clutching at him, but before I could process it, the pain melted away. In its place was peace. This deep, unshakable calm settled over me like every piece of me had finally clicked into place. I felt it in my chest, in my soul. I was his, from now until forever. I belonged to him. Juan pulled back, his lips brushing the mark as his hands cradled my face. You're mine now, he said softly, his golden eyes glowing. And as I looked at him, I smiled, my voice steady despite the overwhelming emotion. I've always been yours. Conclusion. It's been over 3 years now. Juan and I graduated high school and are in college, living together in a little apartment that feels more like home than anywhere else. I finally told my parents about us a few months ago. It wasn't easy. They had questions, lots of them. But once they met Juan, everything changed. He charmed them in no time, just being his kind, steady self. They saw how much he loved me, and honestly, that was all they needed. I knew they truly accepted him when, at Thanksgiving, my mom looked at Juan with a grin and asked if he would like his steak a little on the raw side. I couldn't stop laughing. Yeah, he's family now. The end. Do you believe that people are meant to be? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become a part of our Rainbow Force and stay wholesome.